What is up, everybody? Welcome to the channel. Today we are doing a book review over The Family Rites. This is the sequel to The House Rules, written by Calvin Naraghi, um, and he was kind enough to send it to me to read it as an ARC reader. So this will be released when the book is published on October 16th. Um, the first part of this will just be my overall thoughts of it and what I enjoyed. The next part is going to be spoiler related. So please, if you don't want to be spoiled, please skip or just don't watch that part of the video. And there'll be spoiler thing on the screen so you know. To start out, the vibes of the book pick right up where the first book ended. Um, it really dives into how Lonnie feels, how kind of first half is like PTSD related, and he really gets in that mindset, and you can really tell. So he really wrote that really well, not just of Lonnie, but also Jamie as well. Um, so he dives into that. He keeps the horror genre to its core, just like the first one. There's some parts that, like the first one, it was hard to follow, but he did a lot better in this book, I thought, and it was very much more engaging for me to um, follow. Like I said, I'm not a horror genre reader that much, but the second one was a lot better. He is progressing in his writing very well, and I can't wait to see where he goes on with this. Um, Basically, for this one, I'm going to put it for my opinion, it's going to be 4 out of 5 stars. Actually, maybe 4.5 because I really enjoyed it. It was really fun to read. There was only a very small amount which I had to push through because either I didn't understand what was going on or maybe I was a little distracted while I was reading it. That could have been as well. But regardless, every turn of the page was exciting. Every chapter was exciting. There was something pushing the story along. Um, the characters were very believable. There are some character relations that I couldn't really figure out. But other than that, very good book. I recommend it to a lot of people, especially if you're into horror and drama, thriller. I think it's more of a thriller than a drama. But that is my short, not really synopsis, but short review of the book. The cover looks really cool too. I like the cover. Um, Other than that, if you're not sticking around for the spoilers, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. All right, moving on to the spoilers now. I read the book. After each chapter, I wrote just a few little lines of my thought process. So I'm going to read these off. These are directly after the chapter, not reading any of the other book. So we'll go into the first chapter. We'll always have summer. What I wrote was it was very good intro, reminding the reader of Lonnie's past with his family and brother, then turning it to the ending of the first book and what happened. So as you'll see, the first chapter picks up right after the first book. No, actually, if I recall, I just finished this last week. As I recall, it actually I think picks up at the start of the next school year. I think that's where it picks up. So it's like a couple months after the first book. So they're living at Jamie's house right now. They're sharing a room. Very, very good. Moving on, chapter 2, A Room of Memories. A good show of PTSD with the boys sharing a room, like I said, along with each having their own forms of PTSD. Also, the lying to Jamie's parents, gnawing at both of their guilts of what they were actually doing, why they showed up with a bunch of bruises and cuts and stuff. Those were my thoughts after the second one. Chapter 3, A White Rabbit in Spring. I wrote, I enjoy the way Calvin adds a little bit of backstory from the first book through the chapters as we read them. This one had the gods that the society worshipped. It's also interesting to read these first chapters after reading the final one in the first book, knowing they will attend the next gala event regardless, but curious to see how they spend the year before. As you know, the first book ends with them at the next year's party. So it was very interesting I wasn't expecting the second book to start up before that. Moving on to chapter 4, New Kid on the Block. Just like in the first book, I'm super sus of everybody Lonnie is meeting. I'm even sus at Jamie currently. Who knows with Calvin? Honestly, the first book could I was going into a horror book, not trusting anybody, and Calvin made a point not to trust anybody. So going into this book, I didn't trust anybody. Sometimes I still don't. I do like the different takes of PTSD he's showing here. Lonnie's refusal to do anything to forget, and Jamie's throwing himself at everything to forget. Moving on to chapter 7, Season's Greetings. When reading the end of the House Rules, when they opened the trunk to grab their suits, I was hoping they were grabbing gas tanks to burn the house down. I really was. But I was actually shocked because they ended up just going to it and sacrificing the next victim at the end of the book. Or giving him the pill. Who knows if he's actually been sacrificed. I'm so excited to see where the story will go and the cult that Calvin has built. Chapter 6, Bittersweet Reunion. It was awesome to finally pick off where we left in the first book. We even went deeper into Lonnie's issues about being there. At first, my thought was his mother was going to be the new host. Whew, that would have been a shocker. I don't know how that would have turned out. Chapter 7, I wrote a small one. The Nowhere Room. I don't trust Amara or Carter. Or maybe do. Oh yeah, I couldn't decide if I trust them or not. Are they as dedicated to the cause as Hannah was? Because they kind of feeling like they don't want the sacrifice to continue. But if you think about it, Hannah was very determined to make sure the sacrifice did occur. So it was like, are they with Hannah or are they on their own thing? Maybe because Hannah died. That was my thought process at the time. I feel like Carter was not the right name, but maybe it was. All right, moving on. Chapter 8, The Royal Court. 5 Blythorn siblings. 5 gods stitched together. Coincidence? I think not. I can understand how taken aback Lonnie is by seeing his role models as the hosts, but it's not surprising as they all seem to be wealthy from the sacrifices. Maybe. But I don't know if that was on purpose that there was 5 siblings and there was 5 gods stitched together. But I caught that and I thought it was a very interesting, very nice touch. Moving on to chapter 9, Old Scars. It was nice to see what happened directly after the events of the first book, Trials Sacrifice. I'm curious to know if trackers or something was inserted into them. My sense kind of is confused. It was nice to see what happened directly after the events of the first book's Trials Sacrifice. Oh, I see now. Okay, so they were picked up. Chapter 9 literally goes back to when the first book, the events of the first book happened. So after Lonnie's trials. So they get picked up by a van and get taken to some hospital and get fixed up. So my thought was they got trackers inserted into them. That was my thought process there. Moving on, chapter 10, Olive Chesterfield. Not much thought into this one, but I'm curious why he gave up on looking for Jamie so fast. This big of deal, you'd think they'd want both parties. So I don't remember much of this chapter off what I wrote, but I believe Lonnie kept losing Jamie, and he kept searching for him and then quickly just going somewhere else. No, Olive Chesterfield was the part where he had to go get a coat, asking for Olive Chesterfield to put it on and then find the key. And then he decided to go to the cellar outside without Jamie. That kind of threw me off. I was like, he's going to go without Jamie? When it was Jamie and Lonnie's idea to take out the house? I don't know. And that didn't feel right to me. Moving on to chapter 11, A Little Wager. And now Lonnie is forever tied to the house by getting his blood dropped into the bowl. I'm curious if Sybil, is that right, is forced into this life. Or is it Sybil? I wrote Sybil, but yeah, I think that's their last name. But going off the theme that gods give people wealth, By dropping in his blood, he has to continue the tradition after this event, and eventually his name will come up along with his kin, yada yada, and along with Jaime's, because Jaime's blood is now in the pool. Sybil, I wrote Sybil, so I'm going to just say Sybil for now. The author, I believe this is the first time they spoke to each other, but it kind of course, I was very sus of Sybil, but then I was also like, does he want to be here? Anyways, moving on to chapter 12, Up the Spout. It was interesting to see the trials take place from the opposite position. It was hard for me to follow what was going on with Roman. I'm not sure if Calvin's writing during these parts. I'm not sure if it's Calvin's writing during these parts. I enjoy and follow the rest of the story, but the single person alone parts I find difficult now to explain that. Just like in the first book, when Lonnie was alone for like 30 pages, it was very hard for me to stay focused and follow that. Kind of during the part with Roman and his two trials, I think it was, before he got blown up. It was just very hard for me to follow and understand the puzzle he was trying to write. It may just be me, and other people may find it easy to follow, but that was the downfall in my perspective. Moving on to intermission. It's nice that Amara has backstory from the first book. My question is, how did she know the controls of the control room and what's going on between Jaime and Carter? So during this chapter, we find out that Amara was the reason all the monsters got loose within the house during the first book. So, like I said, I'm curious on how she knew how to get into the control room. Is it because she was a kid during the time and she was able to mingle about and do whatever she wanted? And Jaime and Carter are off sneaking alone, chit-chatting for like the remainder of a couple episodes. Chapter 14, A Roman Tragedy. I had to really focus on what Calvin was trying to write. I managed to follow this trial pretty well. I still didn't understand the puzzle, but I was able to follow it. Up until the clock part, which was the most confusing. But besides that, everything was very easy to follow compared to the first trial. I mean, like I just said in the previous two sections. Chapter 15, After Party. Interesting twist that Roman was Amara's brother, and another one that they're doing two trials. It makes me wonder if they're desperate at this point. So, before I read the entire book, I was expecting them to select Lonnie to do another trial. But he switched it up on us, and it was Amara, which was a good little twist. I wasn't expecting that. I really wasn't. I was going to go Lonnie and Jaime. Lonnie, then Jaime. But it was Amara. Good twist. I liked it. And like I said, it makes me wonder if they're desperate, as in because the last years, well, it didn't fail, but it didn't go as well because a lot of people died. Chapter 16, The Spare. I like that the POV changed. Calvin wrote this challenge in a way it was confusing to me until I realized it was a chessboard, a page before Amara did. Yeah, I was able to figure it out before she did. I don't know if that was on purpose. Very good. My only question was, how do the bishops move if they move diagonally? Because, chessboard bishops move diagonally. I don't know if that ever went over, but that was my only brain thought to that. And what piece does Amara represent? And luckily, we find out. And chapter 17, The Games Afoot. Hitting halfway through the book, I was curious on where Calvin would lead us, whether it was destroying the society from the inside, which I think it might in its own, with one of the hosts changing the room design by another. I'm interested to see what comes of it. My thought process was that, I may sneeze, was that because one of the hosts changed the other host's puzzle, I feel like there's going to be some headbutting within the hosts that will eventually make the house fall. That's where my line of thought was for that. Chapter 18, Beyond the White Door. I forgot about the door in the lamb's pen they don't use anymore. I actually forgot about that. They mentioned it, and we came back to it, which was really neat. I love it when authors do that. I laughed when it changed from don't to can't because they grew up, because they were like, we don't go there anymore. But now it's we can't because they can't fit in the little pulley system. Um, where did I just? Oh, there it is. Okay. Um, Nobody talks about the mother. Interesting. Are these the same creatures from the last book on the chessboard? Okay. So nobody talks about the mother of the Blythorns. I don't think. No, the Sibyls. The Sibyls. Blythorns was the Sibyls. I'm sorry if I'm butchering this, but so I was really curious on why nobody talks about her. And then I was curious if the creatures were the same ones from the chessboard. So does that mean they kept mutating humans in order to do that? Because I thought that was a Blythorn thing. I don't think that actually got answered, unless if I missed it. Chapter 19, The Jesters. As Amara and the boys began to speak, my only thoughts were that now the entire spectators know that someone is talking to Amara. I wonder if they can hear Lonnie and the others. Because, it's like chessboard and then glass on top. And I'm sure the cameras and microphones are pointing at Amara, so they're not pointing at the top. So I was just assuming that they knew that they got away, but if they were there, if they're talking to her, most likely. Chapter 20, Plays and Counterplays. I was wondering earlier how Lonnie didn't know Ramen was Amara's sister if they would have the same accent, but now I know they're step-siblings, so he wouldn't have the same accent. So my process, when I first realized that, I was like, but Roman didn't have an accent like Amara. And then this explains why. And I suppose you don't have to be blood-related to follow the house rules. Yeah, I wrote that. I don't remember what my thought process was for that. Not sure. Oh, I guess because they're sacrificing someone who isn't blood related, but they're married by law, which should have been my first clue that this was a scam. Huh. Anyways, I mean, if gods want blood, the blood drip. Yeah. Anyways, chapter 21. The King will see you now. Calvin is painting the pictures of these creatures, and I can't help imagine bosses in the Dark Souls games. So like the final fight in the chessboard game, the King, all I imagined was like a Dark Soul boss, and I thought it was pretty funny. I don't know if he's ever played him, but that's what I thought. Also, why didn't the boys just lift Amara out of the box after breaking the glass? They could have gone back the way they came. Like, because the glass broke, but nobody fell in because they dropped in. So why didn't they just pick her up and then leave the way they came? Unless if I missed something. But I did enjoy that final boss fight. It was very quick, but it was still good. Chapter 22, Down the Rabbit Hole. I knew the smoke was drugging them through the mirror maze. I'm always wondering how big this place really is to have a trial above the dancing floor. Because the mirror maze, he wrote it as it was above the dance floor. But yet, if you think about it, the chessboard, they fell down a chute to get to the maze. So the chessboard was above the maze. So how big is this place? It's gotta be massive. Massive. Alright, next chapter. Chapter 23, The Last Door on the Left. I was starting to think Silas, was that his name? Silas may be part of this only because he had to, but not wanting to. So there's inclination throughout the book that Silas doesn't want to be there. And I feel that. But yet also sus. Because I sus everything Calvin writes. Now I'm thinking the whole ritual is a hoax for the family to get money from people. They supply money to the people if the ritual is successful, and they cut them off if it's not. So my thought process was, obviously, hoax, right? People bid on these, and and the Sybil family gets a good fair share, and if it's successful, they sprinkle a little back to the people to make it seem like they're getting rich. And if it fails, they keep the money themselves. I mean, it's a good idea. Chapter 24, The Watchtower. I was starting to predict that Lonnie would be the one having to make the choice again. It was satisfying having him throw Florence from the tower. I'm assuming the one in the robe. Well, I wrote Rob. Robe was his mom. I was thinking it was his mom. But it was very nice seeing Florence get tossed. She was not a fan. But I was thinking that for how much problems Lonnie caused last year, that they were going to force him to choose to sacrifice someone. Moving on to chapter 25, My Sister's Keeper. I questioned Roman's death because there was no confirmation of a body, but I forgot about it once Lonnie decided to help Amara. So when they found one of the rings Roman was wearing in the aftermath of the explosion, but my thought was like, at that moment I was like, where's the body? But then Calvin completely distracts us with within like a page to go straight for Amara as the new child. So I completely forgot about that thought. Completely forgot about Roman because he led us down a path, which is very good. Very good writing, I think. There's more to this section I wrote. I know Sybil. Silas? I kept switching up the names, I guess. Was good. I just didn't know he was working with Amara. So, like I said in previous sections, he was leading towards the cause, but I was still sus. And I guess this explains he was working with Amara, which I wasn't expecting either. Amara and Roman. Which was another twist. That's like, what, 3 twists? I love it. Chapter 26, The Battle of Troy. I enjoy the metaphors with Troy and the Trojans. I also enjoy watching Lonnie's aggression towards the house followers as he commits his second murder. It would be quite interesting to see how he copes in the future if we get to see that. From what we saw of the PTSD from the first one, he's going to probably have a little bit more, a lot extra after this event. Moving on to chapter 27, The Sons of Sybil. I knew Silas's writing had something to do with the story. Lonnie focused really hard on the writing, or Silas's writing and stories. So I had a hunch there was something leading into that. I figured he was the one who made up the gods, but instead it was just about him and his brother. So the stories he wrote were about him and his brother. But as in a previous section I said, I thought this was a hoax. I was thinking Silas may have written the hoax, written about the gods for the hoax. That's where my thought process was for that. Chapter 28, Maybe We Could Be Heroes. It was kind of surprising that Amara kissed him. I didn't feel like that connection would happen while reading. I know Silas created the gods. Heckin' knew it. Okay, so that's everything I wrote. So yeah, I knew there was kind of a connection between Lonnie and Amara, but it didn't feel that strong. I don't know if Calvin was trying to force this into the book, which I'm not against, but it just felt off. And also the Carter and Jamie relationship felt off as well. I don't know how I felt about the relationships in this book. But, like I said, I knew Silas created the gods. I heckin' knew it. I don't know if I was supposed to know it, but he wrote it very well, where it was like you're leading to it. Like, he wrote it in a way that the reader can enjoy being right. But he also has the twists that allow people to be shocked. Yeah, that works. Moving on. Chapter 29. It started with a spark. Being around helicopters before in my life, I don't think anyone inside a helicopter would hear the gunshots or also the fire going on in the distance. So the house is on fire, right? So a bunch of emergency services show up. I lost my word. I'm assuming the helicopter is there because it could be a forest fire, But having to deal with the fire and the helicopter blades whirring, I don't know if they would hear a gunshot because that right as Lonnie shoots the ground a couple times, the helicopter shows up like instantly right above him. And being around helicopters, a decade of my life, I guess. That was a little hard to believe on my part, but I mean, it was good for the story. It's fine. Moving on, chapter 30, visiting hours. I feel like the relationships in the end just kind of happened. I just talked about this a little bit. I know Carter and Jamie's have been suggesting it throughout the story, but it just seems off. Maybe it's trauma bonding, which could very much likely. Like trauma bonding can bring people together very fast, so maybe that's what it is, and I just didn't pick up on it very well. Last chapter, the people we become at funerals. I love that title. It is a very nice chapter title. I'm curious on why it's a year later they are honoring their friends. Like, why did they do it sooner? Like at the end of summer. Why is it a whole year later? I mean, I can understand that, a year is a year, But I feel like maybe it would have been sooner. Anyways, the next thing I wrote. Anyways, Calvin wrapped up his duology very well, closing out where it began at the funeral of his brother, and now they're at the funeral they're holding for Hannah and his brother, actually. A different funeral for his brother. Yeah. What did I say? Lonnie is no longer at home and is at peace. I don't understand what I wrote there. Lonnie is no longer at home and is at peace. Oh, Lonnie is no longer alone and is at peace. So the first chapter in the first book, he's alone at the funeral, not knowing what's going on. And now he's at a funeral with his friends and at peace at what has happened. So again, I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed both books, to the point where I'm going to be following Calvin and most likely be picking up whatever else he writes. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please let me know what you think of his books in the comments below. Please go check out his both books and also his socials. I'll put everything in the details below. Other than that, please like and subscribe, and we will catch you next time. Deuces.